Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. Before starting the podcast, I wanted to let listeners know that I plan on adding more interviews of growers this season. While the original intention of the podcast was to bridge the gap between academic research and real-life cultivation, I've done a wide variety of interviews over the years, and I think it's important to hear how growers are dealing with real, day-to-day issues in their cultivation facilities, as we don't typically get to grow under perfect conditions and control for every variable. So while these interviews might be slightly less scientific and may contain some personal experiences and anecdotal information, my hope is that it will spark new ideas, research, and help growers deal with real-life scenarios that they may be facing as well, and grow the community. In the spirit of this, my guest this week is Matthew Butters. I met Matthew when he emailed me and we started corresponding. I went to tour his facility, which is about 2.5 hours away from me, and after the tour, I decided I wanted to have him on the podcast. Matthew serves as the Director of Cultivation at Smokey Point Productions and Waypoint Ventures, a prominent I-502 operation in Washington State. Leveraging his expertise in cannabis cultivation, he has a rich history of successfully developing and leading cultivation teams in various settings worldwide. Matthew is driven by a commitment to achieving sustainable production of top-tier cannabis on a commercial scale, reflecting his passion for excellence in the industry. Now on to the show. Hey, Matthew, thanks for coming on the show today.
Chad, thanks for having me. It's really a true honor to be on your podcast. I can't say enough good things and how much I've learned from just listening to you and your esteemed guests.
Well, I appreciate it. So I met you recently in person at Smokey Point Productions, or your current facility that you're working at. Can you just give us a quick background about sort of who you are and what you're doing in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out as a home grower, jumped around from grow to grow, just learning as much as I could from each one, being a sponge, absorbing as much as I can from each and every mentor or colleague that I had. And I ended up here at Smokey Point. Couldn't be more thankful. It's an amazing company to work for, and yeah, excellent opportunity.
So I thought it might be interesting for growers because some of my most popular podcasts are ones when we're talking to actual growers, and that's who people want to hear from. So one of the questions that I had was, as you started your sort of experience in this industry, let's kind of go back to where you started and maybe a few things that you learned kind of each stop along the way, so someone can kind of have an idea of what it takes to become the head grower of a pretty large facility.
I would love to, yeah. So I started just humble beginnings as a home grower. I always had a very intimate relationship with the plant. It helped me on my personal journey tremendously. And so started growing plants at my house and dove into that. And it was really, people putting out information just like yourself. And I know one of your guests, Jeff Lowenfels, he really sparked my interest for organic cultivation. With teaming with microbes and that series. And so just reading every, little tidbit or every book that I could and trying to suck up all the knowledge that I could and then test it, in real time, whether it was at my house or at the grow, was just my way of stepping up and using each opportunity as a learning experience, taking advantage of every mentor or consultant that I could, and just, growing alongside the plants, no pun intended.
So you said you started off just with home grows. What did your first home grows look like? What style of growing were you doing?
Yeah, so I actually would do a whole room. So most people would do tents, I think is how they would do it. I would turn whole rooms into a grow, and I loved all types of plants, not just cannabis. So I like all plants with ethnobotanical significance or historical significance with humans. I think that cannabis is an amazing, amazing plant, but there's a lot of other plants out there too. So I grow all types of plants, from even tobacco, Nicotiana rustica, to all sort cacti, all sorts of plants at my house. So I turned entire rooms into grows. Used back then it was HPS. That was your only option. I'd kind of lined everything in plastic and have like a little pass through area. It was pretty kind of state of the art for back then for being just in a house, right? And so I had a lot of cleanliness protocols that I still had, and I was growing in soil at the time and just learning as much as I could, and then testing things in real time. There's a lot of trial and error, a lot of killing plants, to be honest. Um, yeah,
Were you using like a nutrient line, or were you mixing your own soil back then? How are you approaching it?
I was buying pre-made soil mixes and then testing different amendments. You know, just like the teaming with microbes stuff. I'd use basically worm castings and teas. Since the beginning of my cultivation career, I was using fish emulsion and humic acid. So I started off on the right foot, honestly. And I got this information from other growers who provided me with that little secret, I guess. It's kind of the secret sauce, I think, that I've been using almost my whole career is a combination of fish hydrolysate and humic acids and kelp.
Right on. And just to highlight for folks, fish emulsion is very different than fish hydrolysate. So you want to make sure one is going to be high in nitrogen, the other is going to be higher in phosphorus. So just be aware that they're two very different products. When you talk about starting off with a home grow, then and then getting into more of the commercial side of the industry, where did you kind of go from there, and how did you get your first starts?
It was just friendships and relationships that I had with people, which are really everything back in the day before the industry was really solidified. It was who you knew and the relationships that you had. We only worked with people that we could trust, and I ended up giving one of my dear friends. I would save all my colas, like my best colas for my best rounds. I would keep in mason jars and just have them like on a shelf, kind of like a display, and I'd crack into them every now and then if I wanted a little special treat. But I gave a nice big cola to a dear friend of mine who was well connected in the industry, and he referred me to one of his connections by Newman Lake, which is on the border of Washington and Idaho. And so I got to step in there as kind of like a consultant and just a labor hand, honestly. I helped with everything, whether it was pruning and defoliating or watering. And I learned as much as I could from the other guys there and also just provided the knowledge that I had. And it ended up working out pretty well.
So you kind of started, sounds like kind of right at the bottom of the industry, just as a laborer, and kind of worked your way up. And so you went from growing, relatively small in these rooms to seeing, a pretty good level of scale. It sounds like on the commercial side. What was that like? What were the big differences between growing in your house versus growing, on scale commercially?
It's a totally different beast, just to be forthcoming about it. It's a totally different beast. When you're at your house, you can do everything yourself, which is awesome because you can take all the care that you want on, just a small handful of plants and make them perfect. Whereas on scale, you have to think about cost, you have to think about labor, inputs, um, like what's the true value added from this action or this input, and really analyze those types of things. Also, any problems that you have or imbalances or pests or anything like that go 0 to 60 like really, really fast, where it's much more controlled in a smaller scale.
So based off that, I would think the keys to growing, commercially, like what you're describing there, you really want to have a robust IPM program where you're really scouting because you do have so many plants, and then you also can't afford to use a lot of these marketed hype products, just because of the cost on scale. They're just not practical. Is that kind of the main things there?
You got it. You got it. And like early identification of any of those things is going to save you a ton of money down the road. And also just being preventative out the gate is going to save you a ton of money. So whether it's beneficial insect programs or your crop nutrition, whether you can do soil tests to be able to anticipate things that are coming versus, waiting until those um, deficiencies or disease or anything like that is, at a later stage and identified on your plant. If you can catch those things before they manifest into something pretty bad, is going to save you a ton down the road.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, I mean, I kind of want to get into that, but I also just want to move on a little bit too to where you kind of went from there, keeping this a little bit more chronological, and then we can come back to some of the pointers and tips. So, like after being in Eastern Washington, if I remember correctly, I think you moved on to Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, well, from there I went to Big Row and Airway Heights, Spokane area. We did awesome there, outdoor raised beds, and then some big hoop houses as well. We did really awesome. It was a tight knit group of friends, kind of living the dream, honestly, from a cultivator's perspective. When you could just manage a grow with a few guys. Looking back on it now, it's really just like this dream, like almost romantic situation. That's like just ideal. And we crushed it. Just like honestly, if you have a group of guys who are mission driven and everybody's bought in, like, and just willing to do what it takes, you're going to succeed in that situation. So we did really, really well. From there, I went to Okanagan, a little bit, and these are pretty harsh climates. Okanagan's a little bit even more extreme, where you have really hot temperatures, dry summers, and then at night, especially towards the fall, it can get really cold, and those cold spells can really spike the humidity and cause some issues there. We did really, really great though. I got to learn to stage my outdoor crops based off of flowering time. Put in some auto flowers for an early season spring harvest. That's going to be able to maximize your outdoor season. Basically, as many chunks as you can split that harvest season into is really going to maximize your dry space, which is always a massive limiting factor for outdoor grows. And so from there, I got the opportunity to get my foot in the door into Europe. Yeah.
Well, let's talk real briefly about that Okanagan experience in the sense of drying and curing. So, like you mentioned, everyone is running outdoor crops there because of the climate, and you have a very clear end date in sight where the weather changes. How were people effectively drying and curing such massive harvests? And you already touched on one thing, which is breaking it up into more harvests by doing an autoflower season first. That would reduce, that would give you an early harvest when not everyone else is harvesting, but then also shrink your harvest a little bit, I would assume, for the second round over the summer. What were your pointers there?
Yeah, so with those early autoflower harvests, they're super crucial. So not only can you bring down that harvest, but you also can have some product for sale at the beginning of the year, which is really a revenue driver for a lot of outdoor farms where typically they don't have. And most of the farms out there are probably doing larger scale garage pole barn setups without a lot of equipment or infrastructure to help regulate the internal environment. It's kind of typical with an outdoor grow. We were fortunate enough, though, to have two completely indoor dry rooms where it was totally climatized. It worked really, really well. When I dry, I try to really remove 50% or so of the total moisture content of that flower within about the first 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, to really reduce any chances of pathogen growth or anything like that that may occur during that drying stage. And then for the rest of the phase, ideally the rest of that 2 weeks, you're going to go low and slow. You're going to drop your temps, increase your humidity, and just try to slowly kind of balance out and homogenize that flower. Because at the beginning, the outside of the flower may dry out quicker and you may have some moisture that's trapped in the inside. So going kind of low and slow, as I like to say, it's really going to help balance that out and pull it out. So we would work with 2 week intervals and have that for kind of these harvest blocks, and work with early short photoperiodic varieties to bring down after that autoflower harvest in early or mid-September, and then have a late September block and an early October block. By that time, you usually have a cold snap that is either snow or it's frost or whatever. And so only the most hardy varieties are going to survive past that point so that you could get maybe a later October harvest as well.
Okay, so yeah, so you start harvesting pretty early, but because of the massive amount of plants that you have, you're kind of breaking it up based on how the cultivars finish. So you want like a wide range of finishing times, it sounds like, so you can do that. How did your product then compare to all the pole barn folks that were, having at the mercy of the environment and in their curing rooms? What were the big differences?
I may be a bit biased in this regard because it's my product, but to be totally honest, I thought we grew some really, really amazing product. It's going to typically in those pole barn setups, you're not going to have the terpene preservation. It's not going to carry through. It may smell a little bit still like chlorophyll, like some grass or some hay. Some of those off flavors and aromas may still be present in there. Whereas if you have an optimal dry and curing time, you're going to preserve more of those volatile terpenes. You're going to have a better flavor, a smoother smoke, and just a better overall experience in the final flower.
And you probably have less risk of pathogens too, I would say, as well. So those
100%.
are all good points. Yeah. All right. Well, moving on then. So now you're off to Europe. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
That was an experience. So I'm truly fortunate and blessed to be able to have done this. So I got to go to Eastern Europe in Macedonia for my first operation over there. It was an intro into GACP and GMP, like real pharmaceutical grade type of production and manufacturing, which is kind of probably where the industry will be headed, at least as far as a medical perspective. I think that we over here should be landing in more of a food grade standard, whereas over there they're doing a pharmaceutical standard. And we can get into the nuances of each one of those types of things, but basically, the GACP is good agricultural and collection practices, and this is just going to ensure it's going to really try to ensure that you have homogeneity within the batch, so there's not too much variation as far as cannabinoids or terpene. It's going to monitor your inputs. It's going to make sure that your SOPs are all in place. So the idea is that if you have a patient, they can actually like set up doses and things like that. Whereas, over here, if you eat an edible, you never know what you're going to get. You may be, you know, not feeling anything, and you may be in a spaceship in your room with the lights off. You never know.
As a side note, are you seeing a big difference in variability in edibles on the market here in Washington? Or is it pretty well standardized?
It's pretty well standardized at this point. At this point, but again, we are now to the point where we're able to maintain those higher level of standards here at Smokey Point. We have an amazing kitchen staff, full commercial kitchen, and just absolute top of the line edibles with consistency all the way through, with award winning chocolates and savories and sweets. I can't say enough good things about the team over here, but
Mm-hmm.
if you're a user, you probably remember the dark ages where you would get a cookie and maybe take a bite of that cookie and never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, you're getting a cookie in like a Ziploc baggie, and they're like, only eat this much of it. Yeah, and I'm a live kid, so I have to, I have to be careful. I think everyone has that edible story, though. Maybe one day I'll share mine on air. We'll see.
I want to hear it.
Yeah, yeah. So what was the setup in Macedonia like? You talked a little bit about the GMP thing. I'm quite familiar with it actually. I'm on the board for a company in Australia, and it's been really interesting learning about that side of things. But for the sake of the podcast, let's talk a little bit more about the cultivation aspect. Like, how are they growing? What scale are we talking about here? Yeah, yeah. Share your insight there.
I'd love to. So we started indoors, just on racks like LEDs, a standard setup. And then we would veg them out, and we called it an interim room, but it was a standard veg room. And then we put them outside. And just to be totally clear, I just got this company kind of started at the beginning stages of their development. I helped them write SOPs and I helped them get through the licensing process. They were fully licensed and we were starting to cultivate by the time that I had left there, but I had never finished any flowering cycles or anything like that with them. We were in the stages of uh, treatment build outs, greenhouse build outs, and we were running living soil in pots. Um, it was quite a cool setup, but I was just honestly offered an amazing opportunity from there that I couldn't turn down in Portugal, so I kind of jumped ship.
Okay. Okay. So you ended up in Portugal, and you want to touch on that before
I'd
we
love to.
move
So
on to Smoky Point?
yeah, so Portugal is just the best opportunity ever. It's an amazing country, amazing people, amazing food. Couldn't say enough good things about it. I got started there with a pharmaceutical company at the totally ground floor of everything before the land was even purchased. So we got to come out the gate kind of setting things up the right way, which was awesome. So we chose the land. We set up an outdoor kind of an R&D plot and a pretty large scale greenhouse. The total property was about 105 hectares. So this was a real large scale grow where we're talking acres or hectares instead of square footage. And yeah, just an amazing opportunity. We were running living soils. We got to do a custom soil formulation with a big European soil provider. Worked with them with the soil tests to make little changes and tweaks as we saw those come back and how that soil was performing in its environment. And yeah, I got to do really amazing things with an amazing team. I surrounded myself with people who are much smarter than me and set up a real great opportunity there.
So were you going directly in ground, or were you in pots in the?
So inside we were in pots, then outside we were in like windrow style raised beds with furrows. So we took the tractors through. We hired a lot of local farmers to create those beds for us, and then we set in drip tape and yeah, we just cemented it and ran drip tape and water only for the outdoor and relied on the soil.
Okay, so it was when you say windrows, then you're putting in big trenches of potting soil, or living soil, and then the plants were growing in those trenches, kind of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I used the wrong term there. So we were amending the soil, adding organic material to it, gypsum, and then balancing out any nutrient imbalances that we saw, and then doing a light tilling and then creating those beds.
Okay, so you're actually growing in the native soil there.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I always encourage folks to use the native soil if they can pass for heavy metals, if they don't have a high floodplain there, or and if they don't have any burrowing creatures like gophers and things that are going to be causing big problems, then it's better to go right into the ground for a ton of reasons.
For sure. Moles are always fun to deal with, but luckily there we were good on that front. The soil was a little compact, but we added some gypsum in there and it really did help actually create some of that aggregate and create some of that drainage, balance out any of the calcium problems that we were seeing, and help with some of the salinity factors as well, I think. So that gypsum helped quite a bit. We had to add a little bit of sulfur as well to lower the pH, but not too much. The native soil was really good, pretty much out the gate there.
Awesome, awesome. So now you've grown. It sounds like mostly outdoor at this point on the commercial scale, and you got this opportunity, if I'm remembering things in order, to come over back to Washington at Smokey Point. Is that the next stop?
That's the next stop. I should clarify that at a few of my operations in the past, we had some small scale indoor operations, just a few rooms at each spot, but nothing like we have at Smoky Point.
All right. Well, so when I met you, I think you shot me an email and we started chatting. I don't remember how. And then I came up to Smoky Point and met you in person and took a visit of the facility. And I'd been up to Smoky Point before. So Smoky Point's been around since the beginning of 502. They actually had a company called the Clone Zone, which was really smart by the founder, Brian Lade, who I knew through the industry at the time. Essentially, right when we went legal here in Washington on the rec side, they already had a company providing clones, and so they were able to provide clones to the vast majority of the industry legally because people were having trouble sourcing genetics. From what I understand, they withheld some of the certain cultivars for themselves that they grew internally. So then they had sort of unique genetics on the market that no one else was putting out because everyone else was putting out all the other stuff they did. And it was just a really, it was a really ingenious way of approaching the an emerging market, in a legal state that I think was really profitable for the company at the time. I don't know if you know anything about that time period because you weren't around yet, but yeah, I can talk about more. But is there anything you want to add?
Not so much. Not so much. I know that since then, the clone zone has really evolved and has become our research and development and breeding facility.
Yeah, and when I met Brian, he was having issues with his compost tea brewer. And so he wanted me to come up, do some microscopy and figure out what was going on. And so I did a little bit of consulting on that side. They did one run in, I think, 5-gallon pots using our soil with chemical, nutrient salts over the top. And when I came up there, the plants looked phenomenal, but they ended up going back to a purely salt program just because that was what they were more comfortable with. And I kind of lost touch with them over the years until you reached out saying you were working at Smokey Point, because I know the company went through a few different iterations over that time period. And yeah, I was excited to come back up. But I have to say, when I first visited Smokey Point, I was blown away by the thoughtfulness that went into the infrastructure. And I hope to show a tour of this soon. But it was one of the best managed and cleanest facilities I'd ever visited at that point in time. So yeah, I mean, bring me up to the future. What is Smokey Point now?
So I love to hear that. Coming into a facility with good bones makes everything so much easier on me and my team. And so that's really awesome that they did, move forward with that thoughtfulness just with the infrastructure. So that is really great. We have tried to continue that as much as possible, just that level of cleanliness. I think that we do this better and more thoroughly than probably almost all of our colleagues in the industry. So, for example, when we cycle a room, we remove all of our tables, our irrigation lines get rolled up, they get flushed out and cleaned off and sanitized. Every single surface gets sanitized. We remove every light off the ceiling. It gets wiped down. Every surface gets touched, sanitized. Every line gets blown out. Every filter gets changed. And then finally, following that is a fumigation of just like hydrogen peroxide, peroxyacetic acid, just to make sure everything is totally sterile and we're not cross-contaminating or transferring anything onto the next cycle. For me, it's very important that I know that my cycles start off, at 100% clean.
So you don't feel like that's overkill. You want to make sure that there's nothing in that room
That's
that could
correct.
potentially contaminate.
Yeah, like especially when we're talking spores out here on the west side of Washington, as you I'm sure are well aware, powdery mildew, botrytis. These are serious issues that we deal with as cultivators in these high humid environments. And so to ensure that our crops have zero powdery mildew and zero botrytis going to our customers, it means a lot to me, and it is at the forefront of my priorities.
Absolutely. So how are you cultivating now? What's the methodology that you're using in the facility?
Yeah, so one of the first changes that I made coming into Smoky Point was switching over to a living soil. And this one's a custom soil formulation, same type of deal. We try to develop it a little bit over time. And so we're going into that. We do regular organic soil drenches. We add in the fish emulsion. We add in some humic acid, fulvic acid, amino acids, enzymes. We do some kelp and veg with fulvic foliar sprays with some calcium to make sure that we meet the calcium demands of the plants. In living soils with a little bit smaller containers, it's really difficult to keep up with the calcium demands of the plants. And so I have to really monitor my temps and humidities and my soil moisture content and my calcium levels pretty carefully to make sure that those demands are always met. Um, but we're trying to be as sustainable and organic focused as possible. We're not perfect, and I'll just totally admit that. But we're doing our absolute best, especially considering the difficulties and the challenges of our industry and our market. It costs a little bit more for us to be like, let me use this as an example. So some of our jars that we use for our habitat line, we have a habitat premium line that we launched in 2023. And so this is going to be our top shelf flower. And all of our jars are made from recyclable glass. Our joint tubes are made from recycled ocean plastic. These are some really cool things that I think that are steps that we're taking to try to just be as sustainable as we can. But it costs us a lot more money to do that. And so if we switched our entire company over to this, it would probably not work out. But we do have that offering for people who are, just uncompromising, quality and sustainability focused. And so we do have that offering for that.
So you mentioned you're in living soil. You're not actually using our soil. I want to clarify for folks. This is not an advertisement for my company because you're not using any of my products. And we had conversations about ways that you might be able to reduce inputs or potentially change some of your fertilizing practices to save costs, and reduce the number of touches and applications, which is something I know you're always looking at and experimenting with, which is, I think, really important in any facility. That you're always, striving towards improvement. But overall, I think one other thing to highlight is that, so what size container are you in? Let's start there.
So we started out a little bit bigger in a 7-gallon, but I had to reduce to a 3-gallon just due to the nature of the competitiveness of the market. I'm trying to reduce costs as much as I can, and so we went to a 3-gallon container. I could still see the same amount of quality, and I can I know with living soils it's a little bit different than a typical like cocoa-based media or something with your drybacks, but it works out really well for us where I can almost have this hybrid approach of crop steering, which is kind of unheard of with a lot of living soils and beds and stuff, right? Most people are doing that in hydro application or those types of situations, to where we installed an automatic irrigation system and I can drip into that. And then my hand waters come through and just make sure everything's totally balanced and even. And I do multiple shot sizes similar to a traditional crop steering program so that I can monitor my soil moisture and keep it more in that Goldilocks zone with smaller shot intervals smaller shot volumes with more intervals so that we can maintain kind of that Goldilocks zone throughout the peak periods of the day and then watch our drybacks overnight.
So you're reducing the amount of drybacks or variability in your soil moisture overall, which is a lot harder, frankly, in a 3-gallon pot. The smaller the container, the harder that is, for sure.
It's pretty difficult for sure. I definitely wouldn't want to go any smaller than a 3-gallon.
And I know some people are going to be listening to this. They're going to say, well, that's not living soil because the pot size container is too small. And you're also not reusing the media. And that's probably something we should talk about too, as to what went into that decision and that thought process. So you are having to bring in new soil every cycle. Why do you choose to do that in your facility?
We're not reusing our soil. We're trialing reusing our soil right now because I have concerns about viruses and viroids. And so we know that hop latent viroid is at very high concentrations in the root zone. And so my concern is that if we chop, and even if we pull out the bulk of that root mass, that maybe there's a high viral load in whatever roots may be remaining in there. And if I don't put it through a thorough composting process, that maybe some of that viroid could transfer over to the next generation. And I'm not saying that we necessarily have the viroid, but most people have the viroid, and it's very prevalent in our industry. And I want to make sure, like I said, that my cycles are starting off clean and are clean and are the highest quality as possible. And I just don't want, I want to mitigate any risk of transferring viruses or viroids off to my next cycle.
Yeah, and I can imagine in a 3 gallon container, you don't have a lot of media relative to the root to media relationship is probably, there's probably not a lot left at the end of the cycle by the time you pull the roots out, I would think. So there's not as much to recycle either. I don't know. What do you think about that?
And like I said, we are trialing this currently to where I am cutting it with new soil. So, like for example, a 3-to-1 ratio of used soil to new soil. Um, that this is the trials that we're running right now, and we're actually having some pretty good results. My next step is just to make sure that we do thorough pathogen testing and make sure that nothing weird is happening.
Yeah, I mean that would. There's a lot of labor that goes into bringing in and cost associated with bringing in new soil, filling the pots, getting them into the rooms, getting them out of the rooms. There's also a lot of labor that goes into recycling the soil in containers, which is one of the reasons a lot of folks like beds. But I can totally understand the viroid concern and why you guys have gone down the path that you have. But I think it's interesting to talk it out so people can kind of hear the thought process behind it.
For sure, me too.
So I don't think we've even talked about exactly how large Smokey Point really is, so folks can have an idea of what we're talking about here. What scale are you guys?
So we're tier three. Tier three is the largest license that's available in Washington State. We also have the clone zone license. So the Rolling Farms license is our spot at Smokey Point, and then we even are bringing over, because the LCB recently redefined what their definition of canopy is, which is really unfortunate for almost all producer processors in the state right now. And so we actually have to relocate our clone zone license over to Rolling Farms just to make sure that we're staying at maximum capacity over here. It's not like necessarily a bad thing, because this whole last year I've been able to have the opportunity of breeding at the clone zone and doing research and development. And at this point, I have so many seeds and phenos to test and hunt that I could last me like the next 3-4 years, literally, of pheno hunting and stuff over at Rolling Farm. So I'm just absolutely stoked to be able to use those seeds and those genetics that we were able to develop and test them out at Rolling Farms.
All right, so throw out a number here. How big is Smokey Point?
Well, the Rolling
Square
Farms
footage.
license is for 30,000 square foot active canopy, and then the clone zone is a tier two, which is going to be 10,000 square foot active canopy.
And you're maxing that out more or
That's
less
correct.
at this point. Yeah, so 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy. What does a typical room size look like for you?
It's about, we have 960 plants. I have 80 tables, 12 plants a table. They're about 4,000 square foot rooms. Yeah, with almost 1,000 plants in each room. And I have 9 of those. We're on weekly cycles, so it works out really, really well. This goes down to the bones of the facility. They designed it really well around the flowering times of the plants, to where if we have 9 rooms on 9-week cycles, every week we have a crop, and so we're cropping on Tuesdays, we're cleaning on Wednesdays, and we're filling on Thursdays. And all of that cleaning that I said that these guys do is done hyper efficiently, and these guys just bust their butts day in and day out to be able to reduce our downtime and maximize our production.
So a lot of that is having a really good staff, having a motivated staff and a happy staff, and then also having really good SOPs. I got a taste of that when I came by the facility. Can you talk a little bit about what you have just on the door of every room, flower room?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I have my first I have my irrigation cycles of each room. So we implemented our drip system, as I said. And so all of those schedules are posted on the door so that my waterers can really understand, when those irrigation cycles are, and where they're going to have to supplement by hand. Also, I have my um, kind of our crop work schedule. So we fill a room and we stage a room. We properly space those plants on the tables, which is super important to maximize the canopy. A lot of people will overlook that, but just putting the plants in the right spots and making sure everything is evenly spaced out is really going to help. And then we set our drippers. We do our lowers, which is removing all of the lower portions of the plant that aren't going to receive adequate light or produce anything substantial. We remove all of that so that the plant can focus its efforts on maximizing A-grade flower. We're going to then come through and we're going to trellis everything. We LST, low stress train everything. We don't do any serious tying down or anything like that. I tell my team to put one cola in each 6x6 inch square of trellis netting. And if I can have a big branch and a big cola in each one of those squares, I consider that canopy maximized. And so that schedule by the day is posted on every door, and I just have my team fill that out, and the lead will go over and check that the task has been done. So the SOP is super important, but so is the training on that SOP, so that everyone's totally on the same page and those tasks are getting done efficiently, and then also that the lead is checking up that those things are getting done in an efficient manner, and there's sign-offs and dates so that there's accountability for each task. And so I have that. And then we also have REI signs. And so we go above and beyond on our REI signs. And REI is a restricted entry interval. And this is something that whenever a pesticide is applied, it doesn't matter if it's a soil drench or if it's a foliar application or anything like that. And REI still applies. And so there's a duration of time where you can't enter that space. So let's say, for example, we soil drench with something like Bovaria bassiana. That's going to have an REI of, I believe, 4 hours. And all this information is going to be provided in the label. And all the information on my signs comes directly from that label. And we follow those to a T. And so I even put for early entry workers who have to enter that space before that REI is up, I state the PPE requirements for that early entry. We state when we finish the application, in this case, a soil drench. So we're just literally just feeding the plants Bovaria bassiana, which has multiple effects, but primarily as a insecticide for soft-bodied insects in the root zone. And so we are going to state those so that anyone, even someone like yourself who's visiting those areas, can feel comfortable and safe and understand that this product was applied or the last product was applied in that room, and what are the requirements to enter that space.
I was so excited to see that. That is super important, and I think it gets overlooked in a lot of facilities, unfortunately. But I can't stress enough how important it is to follow the instructions to a T on a pesticide label, even if it's something like Bavaria, because this is why we're running into pest resistance. This is why people are getting pesticide poisoning in ag. You have to have proper PPE. You have to follow the REI. And so, yeah, I want to commend you guys for that. I think it's really, really important. So I'm glad you touched on it.
Appreciate that.
One other thing that you and I talked about was that as an employee, because of those SOPs being right there, if someone walks up to it, there's no standing around because someone can always figure out what the next step is and what they need to do. It's not dependent on the person, it's dependent on the room. And I think that's another thing to highlight. Do you want to touch on that at all?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, and then so we have multiple rooms, as I said, so I'll do bloom walks, and I have multiple people doing bloom walks. My IPM will do IPM related bloom walks. My fertigation lead will do, crop nutrition related and soil moisture content and all that kind of stuff. They'll check for all those things. I'll check for everything. And then we'll go through and set a priority list, and we'll put that out to the entire team so that they know, even though all these rooms, maybe, for example, let's say multiple rooms need trellis, we'll set a priority list on which room to get in first. And then as soon as they go to that room, they just look at the list, what's checked off the list, what's not, and they can jump right in.
Awesome. And in regards to the facility itself, I know that there's some limitations and challenges with the infrastructure. I mean, there's a lot of things they got right, but what are some of the challenges that you face with your building? Just the shape of the building and everything.
Let's see, the shape of the building. So we have a large warehouse that has basically a shell within a shell. So we have an internal structure built with drop ceilings and stuff like that inside of a larger structure, which has its benefits for sure. Um, as far as like insulatory capacity, that shell actually helps with a lot of things, but with a drop ceiling, you can't hang a lot of weight from that ceiling. So one of our limitations, for example, is the weight bearing capacity of our ceiling. And if I wanted to deck out that ceiling with like 200, top of the line LEDs, it's going to weigh a lot. Those LEDs weigh substantially more than a traditional HPS. And so to swap over for us would be pretty difficult. And so I guess the things that we're doing to maximize our production with that is first and foremost making sure that those lights are are at the proper spacing and distance from the plant. I think this is super important to make sure you're not wasting photons, and you're maximizing, that the crossover of the light to maximize your homogeneity at the max canopy height to make sure that all the plants are getting the right amount of light and the right leaf surface temperature. You're not wasting photons on the lights or the corridors as much as possible. And if you're maximizing, those light levels for what you got and your leaf surface temperature, and then everything else can kind of fall in line there by, just adjusting your room parameters as far as temperature and humidity to also help with those kinds of things. I like a leaf surface temperature about 2 degrees cooler than our rooms. We run our rooms. This is something cool that I've implemented since I've been here. At least I think it's cool. Hopefully you guys think it's cool. I start our rooms pretty hot relatively. I think hotter than most HPS growers, because as you know, with an HPS, you're going to have a higher leaf surface temperature than if you're running with an LED. So people who run LEDs have to increase their room temps to get their leaf temps up to the right optimal level so that you have the right transpiration rates. So we run right around 80, 82 degrees for our room temps in the first weeks of bloom, and a higher humidity, right? So to optimize that VPD, the vapor pressure deficit, it's super important to make sure you're maximizing your transpiration rates and your nutrient uptake and all of these things. And so from there, we'll slowly drop it down throughout the cycle. And so I'll lower the temp, lower the humidity step by step, kind of in tandem, right? You don't want to lower your temperature without lowering your humidity, or your VPD will get out of whack. And then it's going to mess your transpiration rates, increase pathogen pressure, all these types of things. And so we slowly step down our temperature and humidity to where when we're finishing at the end, that temperature is pretty low, around 70 degrees, and a pretty dry environment. And so what that's going to do is to make sure that you're not off gassing terpenes. So the terpenes are really volatile, and they're going to off gas and volatilize at a higher temperature. So for us to be able to preserve those, we drop our temperatures pretty significantly in the last couple of weeks of flower. It also helps accentuate some of those pigments like the anthocyanins and carotenoids, increase some of those secondary metabolites in the end of flower and preserve some of those terpenes. So that's a kind of a cool little environmental hack, I'd say, to be able to maximize the quality of the flower that we're putting out.
That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't heard of anyone do it exactly that approach, or lay it out so eloquently. Interesting enough, I couldn't remember the word anthocyanin in my last interview with a Cornell researcher, and it was bothering me. So I'm recording these back to back, so it's thank you for triggering that word for me. Yeah. So, what is your light level at Canopy?
It's pretty low. So I recently have been lowering all of them. So I'm about at 700 at max canopy right now, which is super low for the industry. In my opinion, this is going to compromise yields a bit. But as far as overall flower quality, our flower quality is just an absolute another level from where it was 2 years ago. And I would implore anyone who tried Smokey Point flower in the past, and we have a pretty large consumer demand and following. But if you haven't tried us recently, I just have to emphasize that you gotta give us a shot, because our flower quality and our extracts. If you don't mind a shameless plug, Dad.
Yeah, well, no, I think it's great. So you've made little changes that have improved the quality of your flower and plant health over the last 2 years. Is really what you're getting at, which is wonderful. And I think on that note, when you're talking about your lights and the fact that the light levels were low, I think they were even lower than that before you lowered the lights, obviously.
They were. Yeah.
So knowing that, and still trying to run a production facility, you can't add lights because of the weight issue with the ceiling. I think it's just a highlight that on a commercial scale, there's always challenges that you're dealing with that force you to have to step outside of what is optimal necessarily. Like obviously, if you could wave a magic wand and have 1,000 ppfd, that would be great. But a lot of times there's reasons why that's not realistic, whether it's budget, whether it's, in this case, the weight of your ceilings. And so you have to learn to adapt and adjust, your other environmental parameters or other things in order to stay in business on a commercial scale. And that's just something that I kind of want to highlight for folks, because I think that's just the important reality of this, of growing on scale.
Absolutely. And there's things that you can do like that, like lowering lights, that really don't cost you anything. I mean, the yo-yos that we bought to lower those lights, sorry, I call them yo-yos, but they really are like pennies to the dollar. But to get the linear yield increase that you're going to see from increasing your PPFD is going to be huge.
And I think on that note, when we talk about the light being the limiting factor here, it wouldn't matter so much, how much you addressed fertility and these other aspects if your light levels are so low that the plants aren't able to photosynthesize what they need to in order to really grow. So one thing that you and I have talked about is how you're always looking to make small changes as you see or identify what you think is the biggest limiting factor of growth in a given room. Do you want to kind of touch on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it comes down to costs and everything as well, right? So there's other things that you can do, like just monitoring your soil moisture, as you know, is one of the most crucial aspects. And so one thing that we did was install grow link controllers and soil moisture sensors. And it's not a massive investment, to be quite honest. And the results that you get from being able to use an analytical tool to get a precise calculation of your soil moisture is really, really important. And also, for example, your environmental controlling equipment. If you can get these things communicating with each other, so that, for example, if you have heaters and air conditioners or air handlers in your rooms and they're set on separate thermostats, and maybe they've been running in your facility for 5, 6, 7 years, when's the last time those thermostats have been calibrated? Is everything totally accurate? And so is any of your equipment competing with each other? And if you can get it to make sure that it's communicating through a central controller and it's all being controlled together, it's just going to increase the efficiency of your room and your equipment as well to save you on that overhead expense.
Now, you've had some other challenges with the infrastructure, either due to scale or due to the building, the infrastructure of the building itself. Is there anything you want to touch on there in terms of small changes that you made, whether it's in harvesting, curing?
I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to. So if I could touch on harvesting and curing and drying, I think that's kind of overlooked. A lot of people just focus on growing. And, even the best grower in the world who produces an amazing product, that product could be ruined really quick if it's not dried or stored and cured under the right conditions. So I can't emphasize this enough. That's one of the major changes. We revamped our entire dry room. And for example, this is something that's got a huge cost benefit. We implemented polyconvection tubing. So you might see this stuff in greenhouses, but we implemented it into our dry room. And all this basically is like a plastic tube that we connect to a max fan, and we hang it from the ceiling and put it right above our drying racks. And so instead of having fans or like oscillating fans that most people will have in their dry room, so we have our dry room laid out so where we have a hanging rack and another hanging rack next to it. But in between those two hanging racks, we have a convection tube that goes in parallel to it from above and gently blows air from top to bottom and then extracts from the bottom. And so you have this almost laminar airflow effect where none of the flower is being, bombarded or blasted with air directly. Rather, you have this kind of soft, gentle stream of air that's going in between the drying flowers, and providing a more consistent and homogeneous, drying condition for the flowers.
Yeah, I was experimenting with that. I saw that in your facility first, actually. I wasn't even aware that it existed. I call it greenhouse convection tubing. It's the same thing. If you Google that term, you can find it online. Or if you go on our social media accounts on Instagram, you can see some photos from my grow. I put it as under canopy airflow. There's a company called Duct Socks that makes a more robust version of this out of a fabric material. That you hook up to a fan and then it pushes air and you can. So I was using it for under canopy airflow, and this was a really cheap way of experimenting with that at my grow, and I so far really like it. I think it's working really well to get air underneath to improve my airflow. So yeah, I appreciated that. I learned something new, and yeah, I'm enjoying that experiment.
I am so glad that I taught you something, Ted, because you have taught me so much over the years. That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's been a fun experiment running under canopy airflow because it's something I've always wanted to try, but there weren't a lot of options for a home grower. I mean, there's stuff on scale, but like yeah, this was like $30 or $40, and I massively overpaid for what I got, but it gave me the opportunity to try it out. So I'm
Yep.
still seeing if there's a way I can offer it to folks more affordably because it's literally just a plastic bag tube that's like anywhere from, let's say, 8 to 12 inches in diameter, and it's got a couple holes in it with a hole punch spaced out so that it's just putting that air out more passively, so you get a massive volume of air at a very low airflow rate, which is really nice for a lot of reasons. And I think it's interesting that you're using that in the drying room. You're also using to plug a company that I've seen now in a couple different facilities. You're using those drying hangers. I don't know
Oh
what the
yeah.
brand is or they're called. You want to go ahead and give them a little plug?
I can, yeah, absolutely. Dryflower. I can't say enough good things about them. So these guys are making really high quality drying racks, and it makes stuff really, really easy for us. So we have these mobile racks on, really high quality aluminum racks. We've been using these kind of since I've been here. We're still using the exact same setup. Nothing like super durable, very easy to clean. You can't really ask for much more than what these guys are providing. I think they're out of Oregon. Sorry if I
Yeah,
butcher that.
I'm pretty sure they are too. And I don't know the guys. I've only seen it now in a couple of facilities, like you guys in Collective Elevation, but I love the ingenuity behind it. Like you said, super easy to clean. You harvest and put it on these, they look like kind of like massive coat hangers, for lack of a better way to visually describe them. And you put the branches or the buds directly on there to hang them to dry, and then you can just wheel that right into your drying space.
Exactly. And then we have like some permanent poles, let's say, that stay in our dry room. So instead of you definitely can just wheel those racks into your dry room. What we do is we saved on the budget. We only bought a couple of those racks, which worked out really well for us. So we transport the sticks, which is what the let's say coat hangers are hanging on. We transport those with the racks, and then we just raise up the entire stick and hang it on the poles in the dry room, and then reuse those two racks. So we only have two rolling racks for our entire facility, and yeah, can't say enough good things about them.
I mean, that's just so much better than trying to throw it all into a bunch of totes and carry it down to your dry room. I mean, that's so much harder on the flower. Yeah, I mean, it's just a really good solution if folks aren't aware of it. Because I hadn't seen it in a lot of facilities until recently. So I just, maybe everyone knows about it, but if not, it's just something people should consider.
It minimizes touches too, right? So we're like literally just touching the stem when we chop it. We hang it one time on that hanger, and then we don't ever, have to reposition that plant until it comes out of the dry room, which is really convenient too.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to touch on regarding the harvesting, drying, curing side of things?
If I could say one more thing, we implemented also this barrel curing protocol, which I think you got to see, which is kind of cool. I think that most producer processors should be doing this. A lot of us are, but some of us aren't. So I would just say, and we're also doing moisture readings daily on our drying flour so that I can adjust the parameters of our dry room to make sure that it's always in the optimal conditions. Because when it comes down, I want to make sure it's at the perfect moisture content.
Sorry, I know I've had some technical issues the last couple of podcasts as I've been trying out new software. That's why this podcast ended so abruptly. I think I've got it all smoothed out moving forward though. But that was Matthew Butters, and you were listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science podcast. If you like the podcast, please leave us a rating and review and give us a follow on Instagram and YouTube. And don't forget, at Kiss Organics, we have a wide range of products that we offer on our website, everything from soils, amendments, beneficial insects, soil test analysis, and consulting. Thanks for listening.